Introduction: the man who was surrounded by idiots. I was in high school when I first noticed that I got along better with certain people rather than others. It was easy to talk to some of my friends. In any conversation, we always found the right words and everything just flowed smoothly. There were never any conflicts, and we liked one another. With other people, however, everything just went wrong. What I said fell on deaf ears, and I couldn't understand why was speaking to some people so easy, while others were total blockheads. Since I was young, this certainly wasn't something that kept me awake at night. However, I still remember puzzling over why some conversations flowed naturally, while others didn't even start no matter how I conducted myself. It was just incomprehensible. I began using different methods to test people. I tried to say the same things in similar contexts just to see what reaction I got. Sometimes it actually worked and an interesting discussion developed. On other occasions, nothing happened at all. People just stared at me as if I were from another planet, and sometimes it really felt that way. When we're young, we tend to think of things very simply. Because some people in my circle of friends reacted in a normal way, that meant, of course, that they were automatically the good guys. And so I just assumed there was something wrong with the people who didn't understand me. What other explanation could there possibly be? I was the same all the time. Certain people just had something wrong with them. So I simply began to avoid these weird, difficult people because I didn't understand them. Call it the naivete of youth if you will, but it did give rise to some amusing consequences. In later years, however, all of this changed. Life went on with work, family, and career, and I continued to pigeonhole people into two groups: good and sensible people and all the rest, the people who didn't seem to understand anything at all. When I was 25 years old, I met with a man who was self-employed. Now in his 60s, Str had founded his own business and built it up for many years. I was given the task of interviewing him just before a new project was to be implemented. We started talking about how things were functioning in his organization. One of the very first comments Str made was that he was surrounded by idiots. I remember laughing at that time because I thought it was a joke. But he truly meant what he said. His face turned crimson as he explained to me that the people working in Department A were complete idiots, every single one of them. In Department B you found only fools who understood nothing at all. And hadn't even come to Department C yet. They were the worst of all. They were so weird that Str couldn't fathom how they even made it to work in the mornings. The more I listened to him, the more I realized that there was something very odd about this story. I asked him if he really believed that he was surrounded by idiots. He glared at me and explained that very few of his employees were worth having. Str had no issue letting his employees know how he felt. He didn't hesitate in the least to call anyone an idiot in front of the whole company. This meant that his employees learned to avoid him. No one dared to have one-to-one meetings with him. He never got to hear bad news because he would often shoot the messenger. At one of the offices, a warning light had been mounted at the entrance to the building. Discreetly placed above the reception desk, the light went red when he was there and turned green when he was away. Everyone knew about this. Not only staff but even clients would automatically cast a nervous glance at the light to find out what awaited them when they stepped over the threshold. If the light was red, some people would simply turn back at the door, deciding to come back at a more opportune time. As we all know, when you're young you are full of great ideas. So I asked the only question I could think of: who hired all these idiots? I knew, of course, that he had hired most of them. What was worse was that Str understood exactly what I had implied. What I implicitly asked was, who is actually the idiot here? Str threw me out. Later on, I was told that what he really wanted to do was fetch a shotgun and shoot me. This incident got me thinking. Here was a man who would soon retire. He was obviously a proficient entrepreneur, highly respected for his sound knowledge of his particular line of business. But he couldn't handle people. He didn't understand the most critical, complicated resource in an organization: the employees. And anyone he couldn't understand was imply an idiot. Since I was from outside the company, I could easily see how wrong his thinking was. Stjr didn't grasp that he always compared people to himself. His definition of idiocy was simply anyone who didn't think or act like him. He used expressions that I also used to use about certain types of people: arrogant windbags, red tape jackasses, rude bastards, and tedious blockheads. Although I never called people idiots, at least not so they could hear me, I had obvious problems with certain types of people. It was an utterly appalling thought to have to go through life constantly thinking that I was surrounded by people who were impossible to work with. It would make my own potential in life so unbelievably limited. I tried to see myself in the mirror. The decision was easy to make. I didn't want to be like Stjr. After a particularly toxic meeting with him and some of his unfortunate colleagues, I sat in the car with a lump in my stomach. The meeting had been a total disaster. Everyone was furious. There and then I decided to learn what is probably the most important knowledge of all: how people function. I would be encountering people for the rest of my life, no matter what my profession was, and it was easy to see that I would benefit by being able to understand them. I immediately began to study how to understand the people who initially seem so difficult. Why are some people silent? Why do others never stop talking? Why do some people always tell the truth while others never do? Why do some of my colleagues always arrive on time, while others rarely manage to? And even why did I like some people more than others? The insights I gained were fascinating, and I've never been the same since I began this journey. The knowledge I acquired has changed me as a person. As a friend, as a colleague, as a son, as a husband, and as the father of children. This book is about what is perhaps the world's most widely used method to describe the differences in human communication. This method is called DISA, an acronym that stands for Dominance, Inducement, Submission, and Analytic Ability System. These four terms are the primary behavior types, which describe how people see themselves in relationship to their environment. Each of these behavior types is associated with the color red, yellow, green, and blue. This system is also commonly called the DISC system, where the final letter of the acronym stands for compliance instead of analytic ability. I have used variations of this tool for over 20 years with excellent results. But how do you become really, truly proficient at handling different types of people? There are, of course, various methods. The most common method is to research the matter and learn the basics. But learning the theoretical part doesn't make you a world-class communicator. It's only when you begin using this knowledge that you can develop real and functioning competence in the field. Just like learning to ride a bike, you have get on the bike first. Only then do you realize what you need to do. Since I began studying how people function and painstakingly strove to understand the differences in the way we communicate, I've never been the same. I'm not as categorical anymore, judging people just because they are not like me. For many years now, my patience with people who are the complete opposite of me has been far greater. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I never get involved in conflicts, just as I wouldn't try to convince you that I never lie, but both these things happen very seldom now. I have one thing to thank Stjr for: he awakened my interest in the subject. Without him, this book would probably never have been written. What can you do to increase your knowledge about how people relate and communicate? A good start may be to keep reading this book through whole book, not just the first 3 chapters. With a little luck, in a few minutes you can begin the same journey I began 20 years ago. I promise you will not regret it. Point 1 thing to note: to simplify reading this book, I have chosen to use him and he consistently when I refer to examples not associated with any specific person. I know that you have enough imagination to insert a her or she in your thoughts where this may be appropriate. 1. Communication happens on the listener's terms. Does that sound strange? Let me explain. Everything you say to a person is filtered through his frames of reference, biases, and preconceived ideas. What remains is ultimately the message that he understands. For many different reasons, he can interpret what you want to convey in a totally different way than you intended. What is actually understood will, naturally vary depending on who you are speaking to, but it is very rare that the entire message gets through exactly as you conceived it in your mind. It may feel depressing knowing that you have so little control over what your listener understands. No matter how much sense you would like to knock into the other person's head, there's not that much you can do about it. This is one of the many challenges of communication. You simply can change how the listener functions. However, most people are aware of and sensitive to how they want to be treated. By adjusting yourself to how other people want to be treated, you become more effective in your communication. Why is this so important? You help other people understand you by creating a secure arena for communication on their terms. Then the listener can use his energy to understand rather than to consciously or unconsciously react to your manner of communicating. All of us need to develop our flexibility and so be able to vary our style of communication, adapting it when we speak to people who are different from us. Here we find another truth: no matter what method you choose to communicate with, as an individual, you will always be in the minority. No matter what kind of behavior you have, the majority of people around you will function differently from you. You can't just base your method of communication on your own preferences. Flexibility and the ability to interpret other people's needs is what characterizes a good communicator. Knowing and understanding another person's style of behavior and method of communication will result in more educated guesses about how a person may possibly react in various situations. This understanding will also dramatically increase your ability to get through to the person in question. No system is perfect. Let me be clear about one important point: this book doesn't claim to be totally comprehensive with respect to how we, as people, communicate with each other. No book can do that, because the number of signals we constantly transmit to those around us wouldn't fit into any book. Even if we could include body language, the differences between male and female dialogue, cultural differences, and all the other ways to define variations in communication, we wouldn't be able to write everything down. We call psychological aspects, graphology, age, and astrology and still not get a 100% complete picture. According to the American Journal of Business Education, July/August 2013, more than 50 million assessments have been made using the DISA tool. And yet even with all this information, communication remains a fascinating and puzzling topic. People are not Excel spreadsheets. We can't calculate everything. We're way too intricate to be described in full. Even the youngest child is far more intricate than anything that could be conveyed in a book. However, we can avoid the most blatant blunders by understanding the basics of human communication. It's been going on for a while. We see what we do, but we do not see why we do what we do. Thus, we assess and appraise each other through what we see that we do. These words come from the psychoanalyst Carl Jung. Different behavior patterns are what creates dynamism in our lives. When I refer to behavior patterns, I don't just mean how a person acts in a single instance, his actions, but rather the whole set of attitudes, beliefs, and approaches that govern how a person acts. We can recognize ourselves in certain behavior patterns, but other forms of behavior we neither recognize nor understand. Besides, each of us acts differently in different situations, which can be a source of either joy or irritation for those around us. Though individual actions can, of course, be right or wrong, there is really no pattern of behavior that is right or wrong. There is no such thing as proper behavior or incorrect behavior. You are who you are, and there's no point in wondering why. You're fine no matter how you're wired. No matter how you choose to behave, no matter how you are perceived, you are fine. Within reasonable limits, of course. In a perfect world, it would be easy just to say, I'm a particular kind of person and it's okay because I read it in a book. That's just how I am and this is how I act. Sure, wouldn't it be great not to have to mishandle your own behavior? To always be able to act and behave precisely as you feel at time? You can do that. You can behave exactly as you wish. All you have to do is find the right situation in which to do so. There are two situations in which you can just be you. The first situation is when you're alone in a room. Then it doesn't matter how you speak or what you do. It doesn't hurt anyone if you scream and swear, or if you just want to sit silently and ponder the great mysteries of life, or wonder why fashion models always look so mad. In your solitude you can behave exactly the way you feel. Simple, isn't it? The second situation where you can completely be yourself is when all the other people in the room are exactly like you. What did our mothers teach us? Treat others as you want to be treated. Excellent advice and very well intentioned. And it works, too, as long as everyone is just like you. All you need to do is make a list of all the people you know who believe, think, and act exactly like you in all situations. Now just give them a calendar, start hanging out. In any other situation, it might be a good idea to understand how you are perceived and to learn how other people function. I don't think I will make headlines by saying that most people you meet aren't like you. Words can have incredible power, but the words we choose and how was them vary. As you have seen from the title of this book, there are different interpretations of yes, you got it words. And when you use the wrong word, well, maybe then you're an idiot. Surrounded by idiots or not, what does this actually mean? As I was writing, the following analogy hit me: behavior patterns are like a toolbox. All types are needed. Depending on the occasion, a tool can sometimes be right and sometimes be wrong. A 30-pound sledgehammer is great for tearing down walls, but it's hardly the thing if you want to hang a picture in the foyer. Some people are opposed to the idea of sorting people into different behavior types. Maybe you believe that you shouldn't categorize people in that way, that it's wrong to pigeonhole people. However, everyone does it perhaps in another way than I do in this book, but we all register our differences nonetheless. The fact remains that we are different, and in my opinion, pointing that out can be something positive if you do it in the right way. Improperly used, every tool can be harmful. It's more about the personicing it than the tool itself. This book is your introduction to human behavior and dialogue. The rest is up to you. Parts of what you are going to read I have gathered from TTI Success Insights. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Suna Gelberg and Edouard Levitt for so generously sharing both their experience and their training materials. No matter how strange it might seem, in theory, every kind of behavior is normal. Normal behavior is relatively predictable. Every person reacts in a habitual manner in similar situations. But it's impossible to predict every possible reaction before it happens. Is part of a pattern. We often react in consistent patterns. Therefore, we should respect only another's patterns and understand our own. Is changeable. We should learn to listen, act, speak openly, and reflect in order to do hate is relevant right now. Everyone can adapt, can be observed. We should be able to observe and consider most forms of behavior without being amateur psychologists. Everyone can take note of the people around them. Is understandable. We should be able to understand why people feel and do what they do right now. Everyone can think about why. Is unique. Despite the conditions that we have in common, each person's behavior is unique to him. Succeed in your own conditions. Is excusable. Dismiss personal jealousy and complaints. Learn to have tolerance and patience, both with yourself and with others. 2. Why are we the way we are? Where does our behavior come from? Why are people so different? Search. Very briefly, it's a combination of heredity and environment. Even before we're born, the foundations for the behavior patterns we will exhibit in adulthood have been laid. The temperament and character traits we have inherited affect our behavior, a process already begun at the genetic stage. Exactly how this works is still a bone of contention among scientists, but all are in agreement that it does come into play. Not only do we inherit traits from our own parents but also from their parents, also in varying degrees from other relatives. At some point or other, we have all heard that we speak like or look like an uncle or an aunt. As a child, I resembled my Uncle Bertil, something to do with my red hair. To explain how this is genetically possible would take a tremendous amount of time. For the moment, let us just establish that this inheritance lays the foundation for our behavioral development. What happens once we are born? In most cases, children are born impulsive, adventurous, without any barriers whatsoever. A child does exactly what he wants. The child says, "No, I don't want to," or, "Sure I can." He is immersed in the thought that he can manage just about anything at all. This kind of spontaneous and sometimes uncontrolled behavior is, of course, not always what his parents wished for. Then, hey presto, what wasn't an original pattern of behavior begins to transform, in the best/worst case scenario, into a copy of someone else. How are children influenced? Children learn and develop in multiple ways, but the most common is by imitation. A child mimics what he sees around him, the parent of the same sex often becoming the model for imitation. This is clearly not an exhaustive study on how the process works, as this book is not about how we influence our children. Core values are found deep within me, values so deeply embedded in me character that it's almost impossible to change them. These are the things I learned from my parents as a child or that I learned in school when I was very young. In my case it was different variations of study and dowel in school or fighting is wrong. The latter, for example, means that I've never laid hands on another person. I haven't fought since 3rd grade and I seem to recall that I lost then. She was really strong. Another important core value is that all people are of equal worth. Because my parents demonstrated this to me during my childhood, I know it is deeply wrong to judge a person based on his or her origin, sex, or color. All of us carry many such core values. We know instinctively what is right and what is not. No one can take these core values away from me. Attitudes and approaches. The next layer is my attitudes, which are not exactly the same thing as core values. Attitudes are things I have formed opinions about based on my own experiences or on conclusions I have drawn from encounters in the latter part of my schooling, high school, college, or my first job. Even experiences later on in life can form attitudes. A relative once told me that she didn't trust salespeople. She's definitely not alone in having strong feelings about salespeople, but in her case it resulted in comical practices. She couldn't buy anything without returning it. A sweater, a sofa, a car. The buying process was endless. Every fact had to be examined and explored. No matter how much research she did beforehand, she always wanted to return her purchases afterwards. Once I had observed the pattern, I asked her why she did this, and she explained the reasoning behind her attitude. 85% of all salespeople were swindlers. Explaining that I too was a salesperson had little effect. To this day, I don't know if I belong to the 85% or if I can count myself among the fortunate 15%. The important thing is that an attitude can change. My relative had probably been badly fooled a number of times and therefore learned to distrust salespeople. However, if she had a number of positive experiences, her opinion could change. The results, both my core values and my attitudes, affect how I choose my behavior. Together they form my core behavior, the real person I want to be. My core behavior is how I act in complete freedom, without the influence of any external factors at all. You probably already see the issue here. When are we ever completely free from external influences? When I discuss this question with groups of people in different contexts, we all usually agree, only when we're sleeping. But people are different. Some don't care. They are always themselves because they've never reflected upon how they are perceived. The stronger your self-understanding is, the greater your probability of adapting to the people around you. How do others really perceive me? The people around you most often see your moderated behavior. You interpret a specific situation and make a choice about how to act based on that evaluation. This is the behavior that others around you experience. It's all about the mask you wear to fit into a given situation. We all have several different masks. Having one at work and one at home isn't that unusual. And another one for visiting the in-laws, perhaps. This book is not an advanced course in psychology, but I am content to establish that we interpret situations differently and act accordingly. Consciously or subconsciously, surrounding factors cause me to choose a particular course of action. And this is how we act. Look at this formula: behavior equals F, P times SF, behavior is a function of personality and surrounding factors. Behavior is that which we can observe. Personality is what we try to figure out. Surrounding factors are things that we have an influence on. Conclusion, we continually affect one another in some form or other. The trick is to try to figure out what's there, under the surface. And this book is all about behavior. 3. An introduction to the system. At the end of this book you will find a description of the background to how this system emerged, but since you probably want to dive into its most interesting elements, how everything works in practice, you can just read on. Otherwise, you can always go directly to page 228. As you can see, there are 4 main categories of behavior types, each of which is associated with a color. This book is about how you can recognize them. Quite soon, as you start reading about the different colors, various faces will come to mind. Sometimes, maybe, even your own. About 80% of all people have a combination of 2 colors that dominate their behavior. Approximately 5% have only one color that dominates behavior. The others are dominated by 3 colors. Throughout the book I focus on the single colors individually because they are the fundamental components of a person's behavior. It's like a recipe, we need to understand all the ingredients before we bake the cake. Entirely green behavior, or green in combination with one other color, is the most common. The least common is entirely red behavior, or red behavior in combination with one other color. Many people you meet possess qualities that you sometimes wish you had. You may even feel jealous of these people. They easily master things that you struggle with. Maybe you'd like to be more decisive like reds, or maybe you wish it were easier for you to interact with strangers, like yellows. Possibly, you wish that you didn't stress so much, that you could just take it easy like greens do, and perhaps you wish that you could keep your schedule in better order, something that's natural for blues. Naturally, it works the other way as well. You are going to read things that will help you realize that you too boss others around a bit too much. Just like reds tend to do. Or that you talk way too much, something that yellows do. It might be that you take things way too easy, not getting involved in anything, the green's weakness. Or you're always suspicious of everything, seeing risks everywhere, just like blues. Here you can learn to see your own pitfalls and how you can take appropriate measures to get around them. No matter what you learn about yourself and others, take notes, underline things, and engage with the material. Red behavior. How to recognize a real alpha and avoid getting in his way. What should we do? We'll do it my way. Now, this is the behavior type that Hippocrates in his theory of human temperament called choleric. Nowadays you might call a red person bold, ambitious, driven, but also potentially hot-tempered, rash, or dominant. You quickly notice a red person because he doesn't make the slightest effort to conceal who he is. A red person is a dynamic and driven individual. He has goals in life that others may find difficult to even imagine. Since his goals are so highly ambitious, achieving them seems to be impossible. Reds strive forward, always pushing themselves harder, and they almost never give up. Their belief in their own ability is unsurpassed. They carry inside them the firm belief that they can achieve anything if they just work hard enough. People who have lots of red in their behavior are task-oriented extroverts and they enjoy challenges. They make quick decisions and are often comfortable taking the lead and taking risks. A common perception is that reds are natural leaders. These are people who willingly take command and go to the fore. They are so driven that they will get through despite any obstacle in their path. Their disposition is ideal in competitive situations. It's not unusual for a CEO or a president to have lots of red in his behavior. This form of competition is present in everything reds do. To say that they constantly want to challenge and compete is probably not entirely true, but if a chance of winning something arises, why not? The exact nature of the competition is unimportant. It's the competitive element that keeps reds running on all cylinders. Pell, one of my former neighbors, liked competing so much that he developed entirely new interests just to compete. I like working in the garden, and so I spent quite some time doing so. Pell didn't like gardening, but when he had heard people commenting on my beautiful garden often enough, he finally had enough. He started one project after another, always with a single but very clear objective: to outdo me. He confounded his wife by digging new flower beds, planting a rainbow of unbelievably fabulous plants, and cultivating the lawn to golf course standard. The only thing I needed to do to keep him going was to merely suggest that I would purchase more plants. Then he would go to the local garden center quicker than you could say bad loser. You can also recognize Reds by other behavior patterns. Who talks the loudest? Reds. Who goes all out when explaining something? Reds. Who's always the first to answer a question? Reds again. Who, during an otherwise pleasant dinner, makes categorical comments on just about any topic? And who will judge an entire country based on something he saw on television? Reds. Something is always happening in the lives of red people. They can't sit still. Idle time is wasted time. Life is short, better get going immediately. Do you recognize the type? Always on the go. So step aside, let's get cracking, tell me what you really think. Yes, for real. Reds have no problem being blunt. When asked a specific question, they often say exactly what they think, without any frills. They see no need to wrap things up in a bunch of empty phrases. When a thought pops into their heads, everyone knows it immediately. They have opinions on most things and they trot their thoughts out quickly and efficiently. A common remark is that Reds are very honest, because they dare to express their personal truths to people. They don't really understand what the fuss is all about. They've only said things as they are. If you need someone with extra energy, you may want to invite a Red into the team or project group. They fight tirelessly along when others have already given up if they are determined to succeed, that is. A task that has become humdrum or meaningless could be totally ignored by a Red. I call this phenomenon slog or split. If the task is important enough, Ard will go through fire and water to complete it. If he feels it has no purpose, into the trash it goes. Can I win something? In that case, I'm I, and so Reds like competing. They appreciate the slight antagonism that is part of being competitive and the glorious moment of winning. They even enjoy winning competitions that probably don't even exist, except perhaps in their own mind. It can be passing a slow walker on the street, finding the absolutely best parking spot, or dominating the family game of Monopoly despite the fact that the purpose of the game is to entertain the kids and none of the other adults are actually competing. For a Red, this is all natural because he sees himself as a winner. Let me give you an example. I once worked for a company where the CEO was Red. He was energetic and efficient and consequently incredibly dynamic. No meetings were as short and sweet as those run by the CEO. But his weak spot was the competitive element. As a young man he had played soccer, and every spring at this particular workplace they held a soccer tournament. It was very popular, even before he joined the company. Naturally, he had to take part. No other CEO before him had ever done so, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was that as soon as he got out in the field he became a different person. On fire with his competitive drive, he flattened anyone who stood in his way. This continued for a few years until someone had the guts to tell him that he played just a little bit too rough. The game wasn't supposed to be thought serious. The CEO didn't understand. He grabbed the latest flyer for the game and pointed out that it was called a soccer tournament. Tournaments are competitions, and if you compete you are in it to win. Simple. He competed in traffic, on the soccer field, in business. No area was too insignificant not to become a competition. He even raced to see how quickly he could finish reading a book. What others do for relaxation he transformed into a competition. 100 pages an hour was a reasonable pace. His wife had even banned him from playing a memory card game with his children, who were 5 and 6 years old. Since they had better memories than he did, they won most of the time, and in his frustration he intimidated them. Before you conclude that this guy sounds rather unsympathetic, we need to look at his intentions. This kind of intensive and competitive behavior often upsets other people because they think it is all about dominating and suppressing others. Nothing could be further from the truth. His intentions were almost never malicious. He just wanted to win. This is one of the greatest challenges for Reds. It's not uncommon that other people feel irritated or intimidated by them because they're such powerful personalities. Later on in this book, I will share some simple ways that you can deal with these individuals. Time is money. Quick is synonymous with good for Reds. If you are in a meeting and suddenly notice that one of the other participants is devoting his time to something completely different, it may well be a Red who has lost interest. If you look closer, you will realize that his thoughts are elsewhere on the next step in the process being discussed. For example, because Reds are quick thinkers, they move on long before everyone else. Few things annoy Reds more than sluggishness. If a meeting or a discussion drags on, he may interrupt and ask if it's really necessary to prolong the issue. We've already discussed this for 20 minutes. Get it together. It's only a few million in investments. How hard can it be? If you think about it, they're often right. When other people may find it difficult to make a decision, Reds are prepared to make quick decisions in order to keep things moving. With a Red on the team, nothing will be discussed ad infinitum. After all, it's always better to do something rather than nothing, right? The advantage is obvious. We're talking about people who never waste time on anything that doesn't move forward. As soon as a task becomes unclear or is taking too long, a Red will ensure that the momentum is maintained and spur things along. Chop chop, done in double time. About 15 years ago I began working for a small consulting company with about a dozen employees. It was a polished organization with a great spirit of entrepreneurship and excellent momentum in business dealings. One of the reasons why they were so efficient was because the founder of the company was a Red. Nothing could move too quickly for Bjorn. No meeting took longer than was absolutely necessary. In my second or third week in the new job, I was sitting in a traffic jam when my cell phone rang. I looked at the display and saw that it was Bjorn. I answered the way I'd been instructed to when I started at the company, with a greeting, my name, and the company name. Impatiently he interrupted me and spit out his question, "Were you looking for me?" "No," I replied, and took a deep breath, ready to say something else. "Didn't he get the chance?" "Okay," he said, and hung up. 8 seconds. Unpleasant? Well, at the time we didn't really know each other. However, I must admit that the whole episode had me worried a little, at least on that occasion. Only 3 weeks at the company and the big chief himself calls, and sounding irritated, when we'd gotten to know each other and I learned that Bjorn was Red, I asked him why he was so abrupt on the phone. Of course he didn't even remember the call, but he said he was probably just trying to find out if I was looking for him. When he learned I wasn't, there was no further need to talk. Wasting time on polite flowery phrases or drawn-out farewells wasn't for him. But at the same time, here was a person with a capacity to work far more than normal. Bjorn managed to do more in an average working day than most people. He still has an exceptional ability to make the most of any free time. If he has a gap of 5 minutes in his schedule, he manages to squeeze in an email, a phone call, and go through some meeting minutes. From the outside, this may seem like an unnecessary pursuit of efficiency. But a Red detests inactivity. Things must happen. Add to this a sense of constant urgency, and a great deal will get done. The sky's the limit. Or is it? For a Red, a realistic budget is a budget for cowards. If we don't push ourselves to the breaking point, we haven't tried hard enough. Reds love difficult tasks, so their level of ambition is usually boundless. The ability to manage difficult situations and challenges is the defining attribute of Red behavior. When a person with Red traits sets his goals, several things happen. First, he wants to know how well a specific task under the most favorable conditions could be performed. If all 19 parameters were met and Will gave it a little extra effort, the results would be phenomenal. This means that anything below that impossible level of excellence is boring, because there's at least a remote possibility of that result being achieved. Nothing is impossible. The impossible just takes a little longer. More than likely it was a red who came up with that expression. Naturally, it's also about the type of project. It's not enough just to set an impossible sales budget. If a red doesn't like sales, he'll ignore the budget. Since he prefers to make all the decisions himself, he probably won't be fooled into doing something he doesn't feel like doing. Reds set higher demands on themselves than any of the other colors would. And they are always prepared to work hard. I wouldn't go so far as to say that no other color works as hard as reds do, but I would venture to say that a red would give anyone a run for his money. Ambition, which is intrinsic to reds, shouldn't be confused with a lust for power. Reds have no problem taking positions of power, since they are fearless. Expressions like "it's lonely and windy at the top" don't scare them. But for a red, power is not an end in itself. It does, however, come in handy for those who like to make their own decisions and avoid having to it for others. A red can, in fact, be quite unassuming. It's true that he has a strong ego, but status and prestige don't have the same importance as with other colors. The reason is simple: a red usually doesn't care what others think. He's not here for their sake, he's here for his own. Let me tell you how things really are. A red gives everything he's got. When he has an opinion about something, or if he wants the rest of us to agree with him, he pulls out all the stops. Once, I was in a meeting with a large number of people who didn't know one another that well. It was a gathering of consultants who were meeting to discuss a potential collaboration. It was in the middle of a recession, and we were all concerned about the lack of direction. While we were waiting for the chairperson to arrive, we chatted a little about everything. At one end of the table sat Elizabeth, who had strong opinions about everything. In an unequivocal voice, she suddenly stated that the company was still expected to earn over $50 million a week, despite the recession. About 15 consultants, all highly trained, reflective, and intelligent people, nodded in agreement. Just imagine $50 million per week. While Elizabeth expanded on how the situation ought to be resolved in the consulting world, I began thinking about the figures a little bit. Not knowing where these figures came from, I remained silent. It could be true, it could also be far-fetched. I honestly didn't know. While waiting for the meeting to begin officially, I started calculating how much $50 million per week would be per year. I didn't have enough paper. After the meeting, I got the answer to my speculations. I was in a taxi on my way to my next meeting when the driver turned on the radio. In the news, it was announced that the company in question was expected to earn between $2 and $2.5 million per week. I realized that Elizabeth had gotten information from the news. I also understood that $2 or $2.5 million per week was far more realistic than the $50 million that she had referred to. But wait a minute. A little reconciliation with reality is needed here. Why didn't anyone react? No one in the room lifted a finger or called her information into question. Why? Because she sounded so convincing. Her facial expression was definite, her countenance was determined, and her voice did not quiver in the least when she presented her figures. That's the way Reds function. When they believe something, they let people know that this is the only truth that exists. Now maybe there are some sticklers for detail who might claim that this is deceptive, since we now know that the company earned $2.5 million a week and not roughly $50 million. But I'm convinced that Elizabeth really believed what she said. She had things turned around, no doubt about that, and she was certainly not interested in details. But my point is that by sounding utterly confident when she declared that the company was earning 6 months' revenue per week, we all fell for it. Or, in the words of a good friend of mine, there are two ways to do this: my way and the wrong way. Only dead fish go with the flow. Reds are both groundbreaking and strong-willed. Why not also add results-oriented and decisive when we're at it? For Reds, it's not sufficient to do things like everyone else does. And just because it's tough doesn't mean we should avoid doing it. Reds aren't afraid to make decisions. When everyone else hesitates, thinking and weighing the risks, a Red makes the controversial decision. Ard's determination is usually unyielding. Once he's decided, then it's full steam ahead. Their fearlessness dares them to tackle things that make others hesitate. This is usually evident when things get rough, and they are undaunted by tough choices or tricky decisions. It is no coincidence that many entrepreneurs are Reds. Setting up new businesses, especially if they are based on completely new business concepts, is, in our current economy, not for the faint of heart. It's not a bad thing to have a force of nature in the driver's seat. It takes a strong mind to move things forward, someone who understands that risks that are part of everyday life and that everything boils down to hard work from morning to night for many years. Reds understand this from the beginning and are in no way intimidated by it. Do you need someone to pursue a problem in your apartment complex? Maybe you've gotten on the wrong side of your landlord, who says that there is absolutely nothing wrong with your heat. Or maybe the contractor who repaired the roof and installed the new elevators was negligent and won't take responsibility for it. Anytime you try to get things straightened out, you've been brought to stand still by a barricade of unanswered calls and info at addresses. You're just about to give up when you suddenly remember the guy on the second floor living above you. Isn't he kind of Red? Wasn't he the one who dared to go against the super at the last meeting and get the trash policy changed? Yes, that's the guy. Throw the guy from the second floor into the process, and then you'll see things begin to happen. You might have to motivate him a little, explaining that he has a lot to gain from it himself. But he will make things happen. He'll subdue the landlord and get the contractor in line. And he won't lose any sleep just because someone got angry with him in the process. Generally speaking, a Red's strengths are very powerful. They are extremely clear in their communication, and you don't have to look far to identify Red behavior. Of course, over the years many Reds learn to restrain themselves somewhat, but it doesn't usually last very long. They'll be back to full throttle and all that entails. It wasn't better before. Onward and upward. A Red doesn't try to stick to his original point of view when he realizes that a better solution exists. He is a quick thinker and has no problem shifting his ground at short notice. One of the advantages of this is that he doesn't reject other people's ideas if he has none himself. It's worth looking into anything that can propel development forward. Sometimes decisions can come a little bit too quickly, but the will to constantly change creates a strong dynamism and flexibility. If anything has been static for a long time, maybe a few weeks, he will turn things up a notch. Some people may find this stressful, but when you ask a Red why he changed something that was actually working, the answer could well be because I could. Naturally, there are also downsides. Reds get bored with the status quo quickly and so they change it. The people around them have no idea what will happen next. When Greens and Blues have just gotten used to the new organization and think they have finally grasped how things are supposed to work, well, a Red will have already outlined the next step. Conclusions on Red behavior. So what do you think? Do you know any Reds? Do you have any around you? If you want to get to know some famous Red people, consider Steve Jobs, FDR, Venus Williams, or Margaret Thatcher. There's also Barack Obama and Mother Teresa. Oh yes, it's true. If you consider Mother Teresa's deeds, the strength she needed and whom she had to deal with the world's foremost leaders to achieve what she did, then you'll realize that she was extremely determined and forceful. A typical Red profile.